Hi, it's Jenna. Just before we get started on this week's episode of The Bench with Jenna and Jon, just to let you know that in this podcast, we discuss themes around mental health and suicide, and it includes descriptions of a serious motorbike accident. If you or anyone you know is affected by what we discuss, you can find help and advice at sky.com/viewer support.
From a small coal mining town in New Zealand to the international stages of rugby league, a man who today I hope we can really get to know and find out more about. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome on the bench this week the legend that is Tawera Nikau. What an absolute privilege and pleasure it is, John Wilkin, to have the man who started mullets in rugby league.
You started the mullet. You've got a lot to answer for.
Actually, I was voted the third best mullet in the world. You had Billy Ray Cyrus, Kerry Hemsley, and then Tawera Nikau.
Oh, no.
It was a big vote. It was a worldwide vote on who had the best mullet.
It was a worldwide vote.
Yeah.
Third best mullet.
Third best mullet.
So
I think you had the best. I think you missed out.
Can I ask why?
Why?
So I had 7 brothers. We grew up, and my mum would just had the clippers just do the sides and the tops and left the back long. So that's how the mullet eventuated.
And look at it now. I mean, Pappenhausen, you name it in Australia. The kids are running around with mullets.
That's what I mean. You've got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, I know
you
that,
started
Johnny. I know that, mate.
A horrible trend.
Back in the day, a few of the St. Helens players had them too. Sean Hoppy used to rock the mullet back in the day too.
But never wore them as well as you. See, what a pleasure it is to have you on. Some of the things you've been through, it's just absolutely incredible for you to be here. You've written a book, Standing Tall. You have done that throughout your life. I guess we kind of want to start from the beginning.
Childhood, yeah. I want to get to Huntley. So what year were you born, T?
Oh, I was born, I've played a few games. No. 1967 I was born, so young, as a youngster, Johnny. And growing up in a small mining town, Huntley was a coal mining town, a pit town. But I grew up on a farm, farming family, 7 brothers. Played rugby on a Saturday, go and play league on a Sunday. So just really involved in our community back there, and, just loved playing sport with my brothers, my family, our friends. So that's a great thing about growing up in New Zealand. The whole community sort of comes together and everybody knows everybody. So it was a great environment to grow up. And my mum and dad supported us. They loved us. They'd take us to sport all the time. And, it was just one of those childhoods where you grew up and, just loved everything that I did, actually, to be honest.
Full of love.
Full of love. It was absolutely amazing.
So at what point did you think, I could make some money playing this game?
Well, it's a funny story, because we'd all play rugby on a Saturday for the school, and then Sunday you'd go and play league with all your mates and your friends. And I made the New Zealand under-16 rugby team on a Saturday in a trial. And on the Sunday I went and played league, and I made the New Zealand under-17 squad for the
choices.
So I went home after that, and I said to my dad, "Oh, Dad, should I go and play rugby or should I go and play league?" And my dad said to me, "Son, just go and play the game where you have the most fun." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And enjoyed yourself, because when you're a young kid, playing sport was all about having fun and enjoying yourself and hanging out with your mates and stuff. So, I enjoyed league a lot more. I love the physical contact of rugby league, and then sort of eventuated from there. And then when I was growing up as a youngster, there used to be a magazine called the Rugby League that week that would come out in Australia, and we used to get it in New Zealand. And one edition came out, and there was in the back of it there was an advertisement from the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs in Sydney about asking for kids to get a scholarship to go to Sydney and play. So I wrote this letter away, sent it away, and I got a letter about 3 or 4 weeks later. I got a letter back from the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs saying that they would love for me to go to Sydney. They'd host me for a year and have a free scholarship and teach me about rugby league. So at the age of about 17 and a half, I'd left school, jumped on a plane, never been out of New Zealand, never been to anywhere else.
And you just lived in Huntley?
Just lived in Huntley. It was the centre of the universe. It was this thriving metropolis.
What did your mum say?
Well, it was a funny story, because at the time I'd left school and I was working in the mines. I had an apprenticeship as a fitter. And I'd done 6,500 hours. And back in those days, you used to do 8,000 hours, which is about 3.5, 4 years. And I still had about 1,500 hours to go on my apprenticeship. And I went home and I said to my dad, "Oh, Dad, listen, I've got this opportunity to go to Australia and play rugby league." What do you think my dad said to me? What do you reckon he said?
He said, "Finish your apprenticeship."
Exactly, Johnny. He said, finish my apprenticeship. What did I say? I said, nah, see you later, Dad. I'm out of here. I wanted to get on the plane and get to Australia. So 3 weeks later, jumped on the plane. I had 2 pairs of boots, a singlet, pair of shorts, a mullet.
Great.
And then I jumped on the plane and I got to Sydney. And the coach in 1988, in his first year of coaching, was a guy called Phil Gould. You might have heard of him.
Yeah, we have
Gus.
heard of him. Yeah, absolutely.
So Gus was the, in 1988, him and Bullfrog, Peter Moore, picked me up from the airport, took me to the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs training ground at Belmore. I walked in, there was Steve Mortimer, Terry Lamb, Peter Tunks, David Gillespie, Michael Hagan, Mark Sargent. All these guys had played State of Origin. They played for Australia. And there was a skinny little Māori boy from Huntly with all these legends. And I was thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
You know? It was an amazing
Was that
experience.
a shock going from Huntly then into Sydney? How did you deal with that?
Mate, I was back home in Huntly. I'd play 2 or 3 games, play reserves, play under 17s, play prems. Thought I was fit. Got to Sydney. I was right outside of my comfort zone, Johnny.
Yeah.
You know, these were the best players in the world. They were, playing State of Origin. They were playing grand finals. And I was thinking, what the hell am I doing here?
Well,
I was right out of my comfort zone.
Well, you deserve to be there, though. You proved
So
it. Yeah.
I stayed the whole year, played reserve grade, sat on the bench, but it was a real great experience to see what it was to be a professional rugby league player. Bullfrog, Peter Moore and Gus had just come back from the Green Bay Packers. They'd brought all this stuff back from the gridiron that no one had ever seen. They had the parachutes, the tackle sleds, all the stuff that they were using in the NFL. Because back in the 80s, the Bulldogs were one of the toughest and most physical teams in the NRL. So I stayed the whole year. I learned a whole lot. Never played grade, but it really gave me a great insight into what it was and what you needed to do to become a professional rugby league player. So 88, stayed there. Do you know who played in the grand final in 1988?
1988. Right.
Anyone know? You two? Come on, testing your knowledge now.
I'm not even going to say how old I was. I was very, very young.
Cronulla.
No. So there was an English player that played for
West. Magpies. Was it Ellery?
Ellery Hanley played for Balmain Tigers in the 1988 final against the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. Terry Lamb knocks Ellery Hanley out in the grand final. The Bulldogs win that game. In his first year, Phil Gould wins the grand final as a coach in his first year in 1988.
Good. Yeah.
So there was this massive learning curve. So, for me as a youngster, as an 18-year-old going to Sydney and understanding and watching those guys every week, how they trained, what they did, what a great culture, because the Bulldogs were a very family-orientated club. Peter Moore had 5, 6 daughters, and he married them all off to rugby league players. So he was very good at creating a dynasty at the Bulldogs.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to fast forward to 1999, winning the NRL Premiership with Melbourne. What was that like? I mean, would you say that was one of your greatest achievements on the rugby pitch?
Everyone, when you go and play in the NRL, your goal is to win a premiership. You know what I mean?
Of course. Yeah.
And so many players play their whole lives in it and never win anything.
But the opportunity, I played at Cronulla for 95, 96, 97, and I had the opportunity. John Rebo rang me, and he said to me, T, listen, we want you to come to Melbourne. We've got a big expat Kiwi community down there. We think you'd be great for the team, but we also want you to be in our leadership group and be the vice captain for the Melbourne Storm. I played at Cronulla in 1997. We played in the Super League Grand Final, and I thought, it's not very often you get an opportunity to play in a new franchise and be part of a leadership group in terms of that. So I thought that was a great opportunity for me to move down to Melbourne. And as you know, Jenna, the number one game is AFL. We'd have 15,000 people on a Saturday afternoon at Olympic Park, and there'd be 80,000 across the road at the MCG.
I mean, we say why?
Watching AFL, watching Carlton and Richmond play. So John Rebo really laid out this vision around what he wanted for Melbourne. And I sort of really bought into that because I wanted to be part of a franchise and part of that. So, going down there in those early days, we had a great bunch of guys.
Scott Hill.
Well,
Kamali. Tony Martin.
We had a whole group of really young players, but one of the good guys that we did have was Glenn Lazarus.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Lazo, played at the Raiders in his early days, won a couple of grand finals, played State of Origin, played for Australia. Then he went to the Broncos, won another couple of more grand finals. So Lazo's the only player to have won 3 grand finals with 3 different clubs. No one's ever done that in the history.
So he was captain.
So Lazo was our captain.
Yeah.
So we really had a captain that understood what rugby league and what winning was all about.
Yeah.
So right from the get-go, we had this leader that set the bar really, really high and understood what it was to win at the highest level. So we had some great leadership in the organisation. John Rebo was the CEO. We had a great coach in Chris Anderson. Obviously played State of Origin, played for New South Wales, played for Australia, played over here in England, won a premiership, championship with Halifax, and then coached the Melbourne Storm. So we had a great leadership team, but we had a great bunch of young guys that just wanted to have a crack.
It's good having young guys around, isn't it? Especially if you're an older, more experienced player and you've got some great young kids alongside you.
Well, after the first 2 years, after 98, 99, 75% of that team went on to representative honours to play for Australia, New Zealand, State of Origin. Nearly 80% of their team actually went on to higher honours. And they were, I think prior to that was only me and Glenn Lazarus that were internationals. Robbie Kearns played later on. Steve Kearney came in 1999, but we had a great team. And, being part of that historic first grand final in 1999 with I think it was a record crowd of 107,000 at the Sydney Football Stadium just before the Olympics. Just an amazing, and there's two games, one in England and then one in Australia, which I really hold in the highest regard.
Wembley?
It wasn't Wembley. It was a game that we played here at Headingley in 1993 against Wigan. And we've got this weekend, we've got Lee Crooks' testimonial coming up. And that's going to be, so part of that celebration is all our teams coming back together on Sunday for the 1993 Regal Trophy win over Wigan in 1993.
Yeah, mad. So that was a big standout.
So can we talk about your time over here and I suppose how it compared to playing down under?
Well, how did you end up here?
How did I end up in England?
How did you end up in England? Yeah.
Well,
Because you had a few different stints with different clubs over here.
yeah, I loved playing in England. So in 1988, I played at the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. I went back to New Zealand in 1989. I made the Auckland side, and then I made the Kiwi touring side to come to England and France in 1989.
Yeah.
So I came in 1989, played on the tour, and then Gary Hetherington, he was the owner of Sheffield at the time. So he signed me to Sheffield, me and another Kiwi mate, Francis Leota, and then we played a little short stint here. And then in 1990, I signed a 6-month contract at York. I played at York for 6 months.
You played at York?
And at the same time, I was still playing in New Zealand, so I'd fly back, because back in those days, you'd play all year round. So because the season was in the winter. So I played 6 months at York. While I was at York, I got approached by David Poulter, who was the chairman of Castleford, and Darryl Vanderveld, who was the coach. They came and signed me. So I signed for Castleford, and I stayed here for 7 seasons. And then after that, I went back to the Cronulla Sharks, played at the Sharks 95, 96, 97, went down to Melbourne 98, 99, and then came back and played for Warrington.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because now we tend to see NRL superstars come over here at the back end of their career, but you
I did it back the front. I came here first. It was great because when I did that, because as a kid growing up, you'd watch all the Kiwis play in the test matches in England, and you watch all the Challenge Cup finals. You'd have the likes of James Luluai, Peter Sterling, Dane O'Hara, all these Kiwi guys playing in all these games. I thought, geez, it'd be great to be like those guys one day, and had the opportunity to do that. So, crisscrossing across the globe. I think one year, and I think it was 1993, we played Wigan and 5 times in every final. So we played them in the Regal Trophy final, which we beat them. We played them in the Premiership final. They beat us. We played them in Challenge Cup semi-final. They beat us, and we played them twice in the league. And I talked about that game, Gemma, about winning the 1993 Regal Trophy. In that match, Wigan had 15 internationals in their squad. And Castleford, on that day, we nilled them. They never scored a try. They got a penalty goal by Frano Bodika in that match. So absolutely amazing. So that's part of why I'm back here this time. We're celebrating that 30-year reunion for the Regal Trophy win, but also acknowledging Lee Crooks and his. I think he's had 3 testimonials. How do you get 3 testimonials?
He's a greedy guy.
Hey?
He's a greedy guy. How's he got a retrospective testimonial?
No, it's 45 years of service to rugby league.
Just keep getting them.
He just keeps getting them, old Crooksy. So yeah,
Crooksy, good on him.
I want to focus on Warrington, your time at Warrington, because it was when you were playing there that your world fell apart.
Yeah, certainly did, Jenna. I was on top of the world. I'd won a premiership with Melbourne in 1999, captained the New Zealand Māori team in the World Cup in 2000, and then came back here and to play for Warrington for a couple of years. And then very, very challenging time for me, and with the suicide of my wife, Letitia, during that time I was at Warrington. So probably one of the most tragic things that you would ever have to go through. And it was very, very challenging. when that happened. But I was very fortunate, very lucky. I had a lot of good support from the Warrington team and the players, and in particular my coach, Daryl Vanderbilt. Daryl was a great guy, and just really wanted to acknowledge Daryl because he passed away last year up in Brisbane, and I went to his funeral and talked about how he'd helped me, how I'd been through those tough times. And it was really interesting because when I came back after the funeral, I took my wife home, did all the stuff, and Daryl rang me and he said, "Oh, listen, T, you just come back when you're ready." I said, "Listen, Daryl, I'll be back next week," because I still had, still another about a half a year to go on my contract at Warrington. And my wife, Letitia, had been my manager all those years that would come through. And I said, well, I'll go back and finish off the year and play just as, just to make sure that I'd finish off my contract, because she'd done all those contracts and I was going to retire at the end of that. So when I got back, Daryl turned up on my doorstep. He says to me, "T, listen, I've arranged for you to go and see this counsellor and have some counselling."
Let me guess, you did the same thing that you did to your dad when he wanted you to finish the apprenticeship.
What did you
didn't
think?
Go. You did the opposite.
I did exactly. Yeah, what do you think I said, Johnny? Exactly. I said, "Nah, Daryl, I'm all right. I don't need that."
Yeah.
Hey, that's what I said to him.
But you went, didn't you?
No, I didn't go. I
go.
didn't go. And he said, "Listen, T, I think you've been through a traumatic experience. You need to go and see somebody about it." I said, "Nah, Daryl, I'm all right." Typical male response.
Of course. Yeah.
So I played the rest of the season for about the last 6 months, but I was a bit of a fitness freak. I trained and I didn't drink much, but when I came back, I started to drink quite heavily.
Yeah.
That
Mainly
was your way of
spirits.
dealing with what had happened.
So that was my way to numb everything, Jenna. I'd just get plastered, gin, vodka after the game. That was my way. Because you go through this whole roller coaster of emotions, anger, guilt, frustration. Why didn't I know? What was I thinking? All those sort of things. And
you were having to keep such a solid face on it for your kids. And for
100%.
everything, you were like holding it all together.
Yeah, and that was my way of dealing with it.
Right.
I'd go out drinking, get on benders, wouldn't sleep for 2 or 3 months, and then after about 3 or 4 months, I'd miss a couple of training sessions, wouldn't go to recovery. Daryl turned up, grabbed me by the collar one day, threw me in the car, took me to the counsellor, and even when I got to the counsellor, I had all these thoughts. I said, they don't know who I am. They don't know what's going on. They don't know my lifestyle, where I've been brought up, all that sort of stuff. So I still had all these excuses. So I went into there, sat down. I was in there for about 45 minutes. And when I left the room, I felt this massive weight just lift off my shoulder. There was this huge sense of relief. Because after I'd spoken to the counsellor, it wasn't about who you are. It wasn't judgmental. It was really about her just asking me questions about how I was feeling, how the children were feeling, all that sort of stuff. So it was this real sense of relief had been lifted off my shoulders.
Just from sharing.
Just from listening and talking and just talking and listening.
Pete, often when something like that happens in life, people are frightened to talk to you about it. They don't know how to react. And I think sometimes the best thing is to, address it and be open and speak about your feelings. And I think even in this day and age, I know this was some time ago, but even in this day and age, people are frightened to ask the wrong question or say the wrong thing. And what you needed was just that openness. And
it certainly was, Jenna. And I think from that, so after that first session, I carried on for the last 6 months. I was every fortnight I'd go and sit down. I felt so much better. And then when I went back to New Zealand, I carried on counselling for another 12 months, took my children to the counsellor and realised that, it was a great thing to go and do. But, for most males, Johnny, we don't talk about stuff.
No.
The only time we talk about stuff is when? When do you start talking?
When the shit hits the fan, yeah.
Yeah.
Or when you have a drink, yeah.
When you're having a drink and stuff like that, so...
I hope it's changing. I hope it is. I'm not saying it is, but I think there's certainly more discussion about people talking now than there ever has been. And certainly
more acceptance.
For men. Well, suicide's the biggest killer of young men, actually, in the world. Men under 24 disproportionately affected by the ability not to talk about the problem.
And that's one of the things that I do now. So I encourage a lot of people, I talk about my experience, what happened to me, how I felt in terms of that stuff. But the important thing now is about encouraging people to share those things, to get some help, from those professionals that can help you. Because I can guarantee you now, if I didn't have that counselling, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you guys tonight to actually share all this stuff. And then I do a lot of stuff back in New Zealand with the rural community, a lot of farmers. There's a lot of suicide around farmers because they're isolated. There's financial pressures and they don't talk to people about that sort of stuff. So, I just really encourage people out there, if they are struggling with anything, especially us males, we don't like talking about. The only time we talk about is when you've either had too much to drink or you're in a bad situation. So I just really encourage people out there, if you are struggling, don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask for help.
Yeah, here. So
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
Such great advice. And coming from such a tough situation you had personally, you know, do you ever get over that? Do you know what I'm saying?
That's a good question, Johnny. Every day when I'm back home, I drive past the graveyard and I always think, it never leaves you.
Yeah.
But I think one of the great things about going to the counsellor and that I experienced was that, you know, if you keep on focusing on what's happened, what's your future going to look like?
Right,
Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So I was able to have a focus and a goal around making sure that my children were going to be okay and they were going to be fine. So that was the focus for me. It shifted to that. But I don't think you ever get over it. So that happened in 2001, 24 years ago now.
Yeah.
And back then, people never talked about, you know, depression or anxiety and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you know, it was just something so foreign back then. But, you know, I encourage a lot of people now to talk about that, to seek some professional help and for people to help them.
And when you talk about adversity, a year later, I think it was a year later,
18 months later, Jenna.
18 months later, you were involved in a horrific motorbike accident that ended up having your leg amputated. But that, that was by choice in the end, wasn't it? Was it a choice of either being in hospital for a very long time or having it amputated? And the absolute warrior that you are was like, chop it off and I'll be back with my kids.
What did your mum say?
She was...
No, what did your mum say in the hospital?
That's a really good... so the doctor comes in and he says to me, Mr. Nikau, listen, I've got some good news and the bad. I'd been in hospital for 6 weeks, had 30 major operations, 6 major blood transfusions, clot in my lung, compartment syndrome in my quad. The doctor comes in, he says, Mr. Nikau, listen, I've got some good news and some bad news. I said, oh, Doc, what's the bad news? He said, well, you're going to have to stay in hospital for another 12 to 18 months. We're going to try and save your leg. Take some bone off your hip, basically fuse it to your heel. It was all smashed up, so they're going to fuse my foot. Take some more bone off the other side, put that around my knee and my ankle. That was all busted up. Take the lat muscle off one side of my back, graft that around the foot and the heel. Take the other lat muscle off, graft around my knee and my ankle, and then take all the skin off one side of my leg and graft it to my other leg. And they said, you know, we don't know whether or not you'll be able to use your leg again. I thought, 12 to 18 months, that's not too bad. And I said, what's the good news? Well, he said to me, the good news is if you cut it off, you'll be out of here in 3 weeks.
Oh my God.
I said, what?
No.
I said, Mr. Nikau, if you have the leg amputated just below the knee, you'll be out of hospital in 3 weeks. You'll be up and running in 6 to 7 weeks. I said, Doc, I'm a rugby league player. That's all I've done my life. Now you want me to cut my leg off? He said, that's the good news and the bad news. See you later on. I've got to go and do the rest of my rounds. My mum was sitting next to me on the bed. Turned around to my mum. I said, Mum, what do you think I should do with my leg? She goes, it's your bloody leg. You can do whatever you want to do with the bloody thing. I told you not to buy that bloody motorbike. You didn't listen to me there, did you?
I love that. Mum.
So no sympathy from my mum.
I told you not to buy that bloody motorbike.
So can we go back to the accident? What happened? Because it was in New Zealand.
It was in New Zealand. And
happened?
What had happened, like I grew up on a farm. Growing up on a farm, you learn to drive machinery, tractors, diggers, and ride motorbikes. So I used to race motorbikes from the age of 6 or 7, ride enduro and race bike, right? So when I retired and got back home, I got myself a brand new Harley Davidson 2003 100th anniversary Fat Boy, 2-inch over, 16-inch eight hangers, had the bike
You're
chromed
still
up.
excited about the bike
I love
now.
bikes. I still love bikes.
You don't still ride them, do you?
Yes, I still ride bikes. Still ride bikes to this day. But anyway, I got my bike. I'd had it serviced, and I was heading back home to the farm where I live. And got on the bike, and you can go down the new expressway, or there's a bit of a shortcut. So I went the shortcut way this particular day. Came around the corner, doing about 80 on my bike, and this Land Rover was coming the other way. The guy had cut the corner, and he was going to crash head on straight into me. I thought, shit, he's going to hit me here. So I dropped the bike, gunned it, swerved on the front of him, and then I went down the side of this Land Rover doing about 80. So I don't know if you've been in a car crash or a motorcycle accident, but everything happens in slow motion. It was very surreal. I thought I was in the movie The Matrix. You seen that movie, The Matrix, where they do those stunts? It was exactly like that in slow motion. It was just see the sky, the ground, the sky. I slammed into the bank, bounced off the bank, did a couple of forward rolls, and I landed in the gravel on the side of the road. My bike slid down, flipped over, and was stuck in the ditch. The guy that had clipped me come running back. I was on the side of the road, got up, and then he said, mate, are you okay? I said, I'm fine. Then he comes along, turns the motorbike off, and I went to stand up, put my weight on my left leg and went to stand on my right leg. My right leg buckled. I looked down, there was blood pouring out the bottom of my jeans. So he said, listen, I've got a mobile phone. I'll go and ring an ambulance. So he went to ring an ambulance. I was sitting on the ground, took my helmet off. I had my mobile phone in my jacket, and I rang my brother. He lived about 5 minutes up the road. I said, Vic, can you come and grab the trailer from my house and come and pick my bike up? All I was worried about was my Harley stuck in the ditch.
My God.
He said, where are you? I said, mate, I'm just up at Frost Road. It was only about 5 minutes from where I lived where the accident had happened. So 10 minutes later, my brother rocks up with the trailer. Him and the guy put my motorbike on it. And the same time, the ambulance turns up. Now, playing rugby league for about 16, 17 years, you get to know what pain's all about. And getting punched in the head by Gordon Tallis is pretty sore. That happened to me a couple of times.
Yeah.
But I had this burning sensation. It was this real white, searing hot pain from the bottom of my heel onto my groin. It was just this really white, hot, intense pain. Like someone grabbed a red hot poker and shoved it into my groin from the bottom of my foot.
Right.
So when the ambulance guy turned up, I said to him, mate, my leg's giving me a bit of jip here. Have you got anything for the pain? So he goes, listen, Mr. Nikau, we don't have any drugs in our ambulances in Huntly because people break in and they steal everything. I said, what? I said, mate, my leg's killing me. He said, he goes away, he comes back with his little St. John's ambulance bag, opens it up, pulls out some Panadol. I said, bloody Panadol, that's what you have for a hangover, isn't it?
I need some industrial stuff.
Off he goes, he comes back again. He says, listen, I just rang the local hospital. They're going to send the Westpac helicopter down and pick you up. I said, well, how long's that going to be? He said, probably about another 15, 20 minutes. I said, mate, my leg's killing me. So he got a scissor.
The worst pain.
It was really painful. Cut my jeans off, put a tourniquet around it, bandaged up my leg, had one of those tinfoil blankets on me, put me on the gurney. So he was doing a really great job, making sure I wasn't going into shock. Because I was fine. It was just the right-hand side of my leg. It was all
I'm sure you were
smashed up.
fine after you realised your bike was okay.
My bike was fine and that. Anyway, so he was down there, and we could hear the chopper coming about 10, 15 minutes later. And he was just making sure I was okay. And I turned around and I said, mate, how long have you been doing this job? He said, I just started yesterday. You're my first customer I've ever had. True story. He was like the volunteer St. John's ambulance driver.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so helicopter landed, got to the helicopter. They had some morphine. Then got rushed to the hospital and straight into the operating theatre.
At that point, did you know how bad it was?
No, I didn't know how bad it was, Jenna, at the time. And it wasn't until the next 2 days later, good mate of mine, Shane, that I grew up with, he comes in, sees the doc, he says, oh, Doc, how's T? How's his leg? He said, well, your mate's in a bit of a bad way. He said, why is that? So I'd shattered the femur, so I still got a titanium rod in this part of my leg with some pins in it. I'd smashed the tibia and fibia, 2 bones in my lower leg, had a compound fracture. The bone went straight through the side of my heel, through my ankle bone, and I'd ripped the bottom of my foot right off. And what had happened, when I dropped the motorbike on, I missed the head-on crash with the motorbike in the front of the Land Rover, but my right leg went over to the side. He had some bull bars that went around the back and the side of the Land Rover. So my right leg got hooked into the bull bar as I was doing 80 Ks going the other way. So that's initially what picked me off the motorbike and spun me in the air. And the doctor said, had it been anyone else, it would have pulled their leg right out of the socket. That's so much force.
Well, you had enough muscle mass to sort
So
of...
my claim to fame was having the strongest groin in the NRL.
Tawera versus Land Rover.
Yeah.
Is it?
So apologies for the introduction. I should have not just referenced the mullet. It should have been the strongest groin in the NRL.
Yeah, and so that's what happened with the leg.
And go to the point where you say chop it off. It's easy to, because you know you're saying this now, and we're talking about it, and you're such light touch about it. Like, you know, you're laughing, you're smiling. Was it that? Are you this way with things like that, or was it much more traumatic at the time?
No, it was traumatic at the time.
Yeah.
Because I remember when we'd scheduled the operation for the next day. Once the doc had done the visit, and I told him to cut it off. Get it off, doc. I want to get out of hospital and look after my kids. So at the time, I've got a company called Team One, and we do a lot of leadership and health and cultural transformation stuff. But in one of our modules, there's a statement. It's called the quality of life statement. It goes like this: the quality of life you'll ultimately enjoy is not so much determined by what happens to you, but by your attitude towards it and what you decide to do about it.
Say that again.
The quality of life that you'll ultimately enjoy is not so much determined by what happens to you, but by your attitude towards it and what you decide to do about it. Right. And I started thinking about that statement when the doctor left that day, and I started thinking about the quality of life that my kids were going to have. At the time, my daughter just turned 14, Heaven. My son, Time, was 10. You know, they'd been through a really traumatic time with losing their mum through a suicide. 18 months later, I was banged up in hospital, probably going to be there for another 12 to 18 months trying to sort my legs out. I started thinking about what was the quality of life that my kids were going to have? Who was going to be looking after them? If I was going to be stuck in hospital, are they going to be stuck with their nan, their aunties? You know, I didn't think that was a very good quality of life for my kids. So I made the decision to get it amputated in terms of that. But after I'd had the operation, and I remember the next day, I woke up because it was scheduled for 12 o'clock, got the leg amputated. But the next day when I woke up, I was still on some of the morphine, and I wanted to go to the bathroom, and I rolled out of the bed to go, fell on the floor, smashed my leg, it split open. I just had it amputated, and blood was pouring out the bottom legs. I had to push the button for the nurse to come and help me get back into the bed. Had one of those beds going like that. And I remember getting back on the bed, sitting on the side, and I was crying. I was crying to myself, and I thought, you know, what does a former one-legged rugby league player do with his life now? So, you know, when you think about that, it was really true. Yeah, was it tough? Of course it was tough. Was it hard? Yeah, of course it's hard. But, you know, having a positive mindset, having really good people around me to support me was really, really important for that recovery. And 2004, 21 years now since I had my leg amputated. Last 21 years, met a beautiful young lady, got married, got more kids, got grandkids, still involved in rugby league. Get to travel around, do awesome stuff.
Running New York marathons?
I've done 3 New York marathons. I wouldn't do one.
New York.
That's
such a cop out.
Oh, no.
Just going to New York to do like you're going to do a marathon.
I mean, I don't like running, but I would consider doing the New
There's
York
a lovely
marathon.
marathon down in Cardiff. You know what I'm saying? You're going to just do New York marathon.
But the thing is with that, it was about community and people, because I'm part of an organisation called Achilles, which helps disabled peoples into mainstream events. And you know, going there and doing that, I wouldn't do a marathon with 2 legs, but I've got 1 leg now. I'll go and try and do a marathon. You know what I mean?
So talk us through that. How is that? I mean,
it was very challenging, very tough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I did it 3 times. So the first time I went with a great mate of mine, Frank Bunce, who was a former All Black, played for the All Blacks, and he was my support person. So you run the race with him, but actually I was waiting for him. He slowed me down the first time. He's got really bad knees.
Oh, he's got bad knees.
He's got bad knees, so I was running. I said, where the hell is he? He's way behind me, so I had to wait for him. So the first time I did the marathon, it was like 5 hours 20, and I thought, mate, I could do a marathon better. So I had to go back again, and I brushed them and got someone who was faster. I did an hour. I took an hour off on my second time that I went to do it. Yeah, so it was pretty good.
That's good. Amazing effort.
So what does life look like now for you?
Oh, I'm very privileged, very busy. Currently, I'm the president for New Zealand Rugby League, which is a great role. I'm a selector for the New Zealand Kiwis team. Also involved with the Melbourne Storm. I'm a life member. I'm ambassador. Go back every year, talk to a lot of the players about the history, the culture. I manage 3 farms back in New Zealand that we have. We have a solar farm, we have a dairy farm, we have a cropping farm. And I sit on one of our tribal boards and I chair a couple of other boards. So, yeah, still passionate about rugby league. That's my number one passion. Have been, always will be. But you know,
living the good life.
Living the good life back in New Zealand. Eating plenty, training people. Well, one of the important things, and I think this is, you know, one of the things we talk about, having your communities, being involved with rugby league is still involved at the grassroots level. Yeah. So, you know, very privileged to be here tonight. You know, going to be watching the game a bit later on, but back here in the UK supporting one of my former teammates, Lee Crooks, for his testimonial. Yeah, 4th testimonial. Good on you, Crooksy. Johnny, have you had one yet? You haven't even had one.
I mean, I'm due a second.
You're due a second one,
I'm due a second, yeah.
In terms of that. So I'm really enjoying life, Jenna. Great to be back in the UK. Got so many friends and associates and teams and people over the years. So, yeah, I'm just very happy at the moment. Very content. But, just loving life.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we knew that you were going to come on the podcast, and thanks so much for giving us your time, I think one thing, I knew your story and I knew the things that had happened. What so impressed me when I was reading and watching things that you've said and done is how in the most difficult situations you make things feel and sound positive and light and have some like love and energy about situations that were really traumatic. And I don't know how you've done that, but it's remarkable. It's not normal. You know, even Jenna saying about your reaction to your leg, it's just not normal. And I find it
admirable.
It's mesmerising, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's part of the upbringing and the, you know, being Māori and being spiritual. There's a spiritual side to that for us too, you know, in terms of the upbringing and with my parents and my family and my extended family and stuff like that. There's another side for us. We're very lucky as Māori. We have a cultural and a wairua, we call it. That's our spiritual side in terms of who we are and what we do. So I think I'm very fortunate. We're sort of a little bit more fortunate to have that as a cultural basis of who we are too. And that's helped me a lot in a lot of the challenges that I've been through.
I want to end with, I suppose, people out there who might be struggling with mental health issues, with certain horrific incidents that happen to them. What message, what helped get you through those tough times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the main things for me is, and as a youngster growing up, having a really good support network around you is really important, Jenna. Whether it be your friends, your family, or someone you can talk to, having a really good support network. One thing for me is like, if you're going to be mentally right, you have to be physically right. So, looking after yourself, doing exercise, your nutrition, eating well. And the biggest thing now, and this is the biggest thing that a lot of people don't know, is really making sure you get lots of good sleep. Rest and recovery is really important for your mental well-being. Nutrition is another part of that. And actually exercise. There's some studies done around the more you exercise, the more energy you have, the more mentally that you do feel well. But also, at the end of the day, you have a choice. You can make a choice. And sometimes people just get to a space where, they can't make that choice. So, having good people around you, not being afraid. I think one of the great things that I've learned is by being open and vulnerable in terms of yourself and being able to say, listen, yeah, maybe I'm a male, but, we all need help sometimes. Yeah. That's the other side to this is, just being open, honest, and having that vulnerability to be able to talk and share some of those challenges or those things that you may be struggling with. So, I'd encourage everybody to have a think about those things.
T, what an absolute privilege
pleasure, yeah.
it's been having you on the Bench podcast. Thank you so much for your
Get
time.
the mullet back. Get the mullet back.
It's kind of there. I mean, it's
part there. It could be the grey mullet coming back. I'm not too sure, but
he'd look like a character out of Game of Thrones, wouldn't he? If he grew with the grey mullet, he'd be like a wizard.
Just want to say, hey, thanks for having me. It's always a privilege and a pleasure, and great to be back here in the UK. And just want to wish everybody all the best for the future, whatever that may be. So. Thank you very much.
We wish you the best as well. Thank you so much, T. Thank you.